The Prime Minister is certainly leaving the door open in those comments. What do you make of this suggestion?
Well, bless him. I think it was music to the tourism industry's ears. Look, I think that it has always been in the back of the mind of the New South Wales government that if they could reach this kind of vaccination level, they would feel confident about opening to international. And this would be a great thing, particularly at this point in time, Danica, because there are a couple of problems we really genuinely have. And that is that as the rest of the world opens up, there's enormous pressure for all of our international airlines to send their planes, their pilots, whatever else, to other parts of the world. And then we have to win them back to Australia when we are actually ready to open. So the sooner we open and the more able we are to keep those flights coming into Australia, the better.
Absolutely. And you mentioned Gladys Berejiklian. She's been quite firm in her stance that she wants people in New South Wales to be able to travel overseas once that threshold is met. But what work is being done, Margy, behind the scenes to be able to once again reopen the international border?
Well, look, I think there are a whole range of issues, not the least of which are things like vaccine recognition. Do we know, for example, that Australia is going to accept incoming visitors with, Sinovac, the Chinese vaccine, for example? Do we know that they're going to accept some of the Indian vaccines? Do we know which ones are going to be acceptable and in what set of circumstances? That's still to really be determined for the industry. I think the other thing is the processes around this, and Home Affairs and Border Force are working very hard at the moment with their colleagues in places like New Zealand and Singapore and so forth to get some commonality of system, because that's the other part of this puzzle. We've got to keep Australians safe, but we've also got to have some commonality of system so this doesn't become just a nightmare for the operators and for travellers.
I note that Qantas has even started taking bookings for Singapore in December this year. How optimistic is the sector for a resumption of travel internationally later this year?
Well, I'd say cautiously optimistic. I think that we obviously have some ongoing problems with the domestic borders here in Australia. And to be honest with you, Danica, we're about to lose the fourth set of domestic school holidays in a row. So for an industry to rely upon a domestic market that is uniquely unreliable at this point in time, gosh, in some ways an international mechanism into places like New South Wales and Victoria starts to look like a much safer idea. And to be honest, for a lot of the other states, the bulk of their travellers actually come from New South Wales and Victoria. So as long as they are close to New South Wales and Victoria, their tourism industries will be bleeding and in terrible pain.
Well, WA and Queensland have certainly backed away at this stage from National Cabinet's plan to reopen. How far does it set tourism operators back in terms of them trying to prepare for domestic travel for next year?
Well, it's a bit of a nightmare in terms of having any sort of certainty on how to prepare. I mean, Australians from a domestic point of view used to be famous for booking months in advance, so you could always tell when people were going to travel. That isn't the case anymore. Everybody travels at the last moment. And to a degree, that may now be an international travel trend as people try and respond to what they see as changing circumstances. So I think, that's an issue. Having said that, the international visitors bring in to Australia something like $3 billion a month. So the sooner we've got that up and running, and particularly through New South Wales and Victoria, the gateway states, the better.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the Tourism and Transport Forum has teamed up with other tourism and hospitality industries to prepare the sectors for when 70% double dose is reached in New South Wales, that target likely to be mid-October. Have you been given an indication as to what 70% will look like for the sector?
Well, look, I think the government in New South Wales very wisely is trying to prepare themselves for this point and to see what the issues are going to be for the business community, particularly the lifestyle industries that are probably going to be top of everybody's list of things they most want to do again when the lockdown's up. So going to a restaurant, going to the pub, going away for a weekend, going to the cinema, all of these kinds of things. And what it is going to mean is vaccinated customers. So we are going to be looking at a vaccination passport style mechanism for people to be able to access these services and treats, if you like, the things we used to take for granted. But we're very confident. The government's being extremely receptive to our industries and is being very practical about it, and very safety conscious, but very practical.